Chapter 10. She saw the floor first, red marble, its white veins illuminated in the light of the sun, which slowly vanished as the opaque glass doors groaned shut. Chandeliers and torches hung all around. Her eyes darted from one side of the large crowded chamber to the next. There were no windows, just a wall of glass looking out into nothing but sky. No escape, save for the door behind her. To her left, a fireplace occupied most of the wall, and as Cal led her father into the room, Selena tried not to stare at the thing. It was monstrous, shaped like a roaring fanged mouth, a blazing fire burning within. There was something greenish about the flame, something that made her spine straighten. The captain stopped in the open space before the throne, and Selena halted with him. He didn't seem to notice their ominous surroundings, or, if he did, he hid it far better. She pulled her gaze forward, taking in the crowd that filled the room. Stiffly, knowing that many eyes were upon her, Selena dropped into a low bow, her skirts whispering. She found her legs weak when Cal put a hand on her back to motion her to rise. He led her from the centre of the room, where they took up a spot beside Dorian Haviliard. The absence of dirt and 3 weeks' worth of hard travel had a noticeable effect on his smooth face. He wore a red and gold jacket, his black hair brushed and shining. An expression of surprise crossed his features when he beheld her in her finery, but it quickly melted into a wry grin as he looked towards his father. She might have returned it, had she not been focusing so much on keeping her hands from shaking. The king spoke at last. "Now you've all finally bothered to arrive, perhaps we can begin." It was a voice she'd heard before, deep and raspy, and made her bones crack and splinter, made her feel the astonishing cold of a winter long since past. Her eyes only dared to venture as far as his chest. It was broad, not entirely with muscle, and seemed tightly restrained within a crimson and black tunic. A cape of white fur hung from his shoulders, and a sword was sheathed at his side. Atop its hilt perched a wyvern, open-mouthed and screaming. None that came before that broad blade lived to see another day. She knew that sword. Nothing was its name. "You have all been retrieved from across Aurelia for the purpose of serving your country." It was easy enough to tell the nobility from her competitors. Old and wrinkled, each nobleman wore fine clothes and decorative swords. Besides, each of them stood a man, some tall and slender, some burly, some average, all of them surrounded by at least 3 vigilant guards. 23 men stood between her and freedom. Most of them had enough bulk to warrant a double take, but when she scanned their faces, often scarred, pockmarked, or just plain hideous, there was no spark behind their eyes, no shining kernel of cleverness. They had been picked for muscles, not brains. 3 of them were actually in chains. Were they that dangerous? A few of them met her gaze, and she stared right back, wondering if they thought she was a competitor or just a court lady. Most of the competitors' attention jumped right over her. She gritted her teeth. The dress had been a mistake. Why had Cal not told her about the meeting yesterday? A moderately handsome black-haired young man stared at her, though, and she willed her face into neutrality while his grey eyes took her in. He was tall and lean, but not gangly, and he inclined his head to her. She studied him for a moment longer, from the way he balanced his weight to his left, to what feature he first noticed when his eyes moved on and he examined the other competitors. One was a gargantuan man standing beside Duke Parrington, who seemed crafted of muscle and steel, and took pains to display it with his sleeveless armour. The man's arms looked capable of crushing a horse's skull. It wasn't that he was ugly. In fact, his tanned face was rather pleasant, but there was something nasty about his demeanour, about his obsidian eyes as they shifted and met her own. His large white teeth gleamed. The king spoke. "You are each competing for the title of my champion, my right-hand sword in a world brimming with enemies." A flicker of shame sparked within her. What was champion but a dressed-up name for murderer? Could she actually stomach working for him? She swallowed. She had to. She had no other choice. "Over the next 13 weeks, you shall each dwell and compete in my home. You will train every day and be tested once a week. A test during which one of you will be eliminated." Selena did the calculations. There were 24 of them, and only 13 weeks. As if sensing her question, the king said, "These tests will not be easy, nor will your training. Some of you might die in the process. We will add additional elimination tests as we see fit. And if you fall behind, if you fail, if you displease me, you will be packed off to whatever dark hole you came from." The week after Yormas, the 4 remaining champions will face each other in a duel to win the title. Until then, while my court is aware that some sort of contest is being held among my closest friends and advisors, he waved a huge, scarred hand to encompass the room, you will keep your business private. Any wrongdoing on your part, and I'll stake you to the front gates. By accident, her gaze slipped onto the king's face, and she found his dark eyes staring into hers. The king smirked. Her heart threw itself backward and clung to the bars of her rib cage. Murderer. He should be hanging from the gallows. He had killed many more than she, people undeserving and defenseless. He had destroyed cultures, destroyed invaluable knowledge, destroyed so much of what had once been bright and good. His people should revolt. Aurelia should revolt. The way those few rebels had dared to do. Selena struggled to maintain his gaze. She couldn't retreat. "Is that understood?" the king asked, still staring at her. Her head was heavy as she nodded. She had only until Yormas to beat them all. 1 test a week, perhaps more. "Speak!" the king bellowed to the room, and she tried not to flinch. "Are you not grateful for this opportunity? Do you not wish to give me your thanks and allegiance?" She bowed her head and stared at his feet. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I am most appreciative," she murmured, the sound blending in within the words of the other champions. The king put a hand upon Nothing's hilt. This should be an interesting 13 weeks. She could still feel his attention still upon her face, and she grounded her teeth. "Prove trustworthy, become my champion, and wealth and glory shall be yours eternal." Only 13 weeks to win her freedom. "I am to depart next week for my own purposes. I will not return until Yulmus. But don't think I won't be able to give the command to execute any of you, should I hear a word of any trouble or accidents." The champions nodded once more. "If we're finished, I'm afraid I must take my leave," interrupted Dorian from beside her, and her head snapped up at the sound of his voice and his impertinence in interrupting his father. He bowed to his father and nodded to the mute councillors. The king waved his son away, not even bothering to look at him. Dorian winked at Cale before walking from the room. "If there are no questions," the king said to the champions and their sponsors in a tone that suggested that asking questions would only guarantee a trip to the gallows, "then you have my leave. Do not forget that you are here to honour me and my empire. Be gone, all of you." Selena and Cale didn't speak as they strode down the hallway, quickly moving from the throng of competitors and their sponsors who lingered to speak with one another and size each other up. With every step away from the king, steady warmth returned. It wasn't until they rounded a corner that Cal let out a deep breath and removed his hand from her back. "Well, you managed to keep your mouth shut, for once," he said. "But how convincing she was in her nodding and bowing," said a cheerful voice. It was Dorian, leaning against a wall. "What are you doing?" Cal asked. Dorian pushed off the wall. "While waiting for you, of course." "We're to dine this evening," Cal said. "I was speaking to my champion," Dorian said with a roguish wink. Remembering how he'd smiled at the court lady the day of their arrival, she kept her gaze ahead. The Crown Prince took up a place safely beside Cal as they walked on. "I apologize for my father's gruffness." She stared down the hall at the servants who bowed to Dorian. He ignored them. "By the word," Dorian laughed. "He's trained you well already." He nudged Cal with his elbow. "From the way you two are blatantly ignoring me, I'd say she'd pass for your sister. Though you don't really look like each other, it would be hard to pass off someone so pretty as your sister." Selena was unable to keep a hint of a smile from her lips. Both she and the prince had grown up under strict, unforgiving fathers. Well, father figure in her case. Arabin had never replaced the father she'd lost, nor had he tried to. But at least Arabin had an excuse for being equal parts tyrannical and doting. Why had the king of Ardalan let his son become anything but an identical copy of himself? "There," Dorian said. "A reaction. Thank the gods I've amused her." He glanced behind them, making sure that there was no one there, before his voice quietened. "I don't think Cal told you of our plan before the meeting. Risky on all of our parts." "What plan?" She traced a finger along the beading on her skirts, watching it shimmer in the afternoon light. "For your identity, which you should keep quiet about. Your competitors might know a thing or two about Ardalan's assassin and use it against you." Fair enough, even if it had taken them weeks to bother to fill her in. "And who exactly am I to be, if not a ruthless killer?" "To everyone in this castle," Dorian said. "Your name is Lillian Gordana. Your mother is dead, and your father is a wealthy merchant from Belhaven. You are the sole heir to his fortune. However, you have a dark secret. You spend your nights as a jewel thief. I met you this summer after you tried to rob me while I was vacationing in Belhaven, and I saw your potential then. But your father discovered your nightly fun and removed you from the lure of the city to a town near Indovia. When my father decided to have this competition, I journeyed to find you and brought you here as my champion. You can fill in the gaps yourself." She raised her brows. "Really? A jewel thief?" Cale snorted, but Dorian went on. "It's rather charming, don't you think?" When she didn't respond, the prince asked, "Do you find my home to your liking?" "It's very fine indeed," she said dully. "Very fine indeed? Maybe I should move my champion to even large chambers, if it pleases you." Dorian chuckled. "I'm glad to find that seeing your competition hasn't damaged that swagger of yours. What did you make Cain?" She knew whom he meant. "Perhaps you should start feeding me whatever Parrington is giving him." When Dorian continued staring at her, she rolled her eyes. "Men of his size usually aren't very fast or very nimble. He could knock me out in one punch, probably, but he'd have to be swift enough to catch me." She gave Cale a quick glance, daring him to challenge her claim, but Dorian answered, "Good, I thought so. And what of the others? Any potential rivals? Some of the champions have rather gruesome reputations." "Everyone else looks pathetic," she lied. The prince's smile grew. I bet they won't expect to be trounced by a beautiful lady. This was all a game to him, wasn't it? Before Selena could ask, someone curtsied in the middle of their path. Your Highness, what a surprise! The voice was high, but smooth and calculated. It was a woman from the garden. She changed. She now wore a gown of white and gold that, despite herself, Selena greatly admired. She was unfairly stunning, and Selena was willing to bet a fortune that this was anything but a surprise. The woman had probably been waiting here for a while. Lady Cautain, Dorian said tersely, his body tensing. I've just come from Her Majesty's side, said Cautain, putting her back to Selena. The assassin might have been bothered to care about the slight if she had any interest in courtiers. Her Majesty wishes to see your Highness. Of course, I informed Her Majesty that your Highness was in a meeting and could not be. Lady Cautain, interrupted Dorian. I'm afraid you haven't been introduced to my friend. Selena could have sworn that the young woman bristled. Allow me to present the Lady Lillian Gordania. Lady Lillian, meet Lady Cautain Brompier. Selena curtsied, restraining the urge to keep walking. If she had to deal with too much courtly nonsense, she might be better off back in Endovia. Cautain bowed, the gold streaks in her dress glistening in the sunlight. Lady Lillian is from Belhaven. She arrived just yesterday. The woman studied Selena from beneath dark-shaped eyebrows. And how long will you be staying with us? Only a few years, Dorian said with a sigh. Only? Why, your Highness, how droll. That is a very long stretch of time. Selena studied Cautain's narrow waist. Was it really that small? Or could she barely breathe in her corset? She caught a glance exchanged between the two men. Exasperation, annoyance, condescension. The Lady Lillian and Captain Westfold are very close friends, Dorian said dramatically. To Selena's delight, Cale blushed. It'll feel short for them, I assure you. And for your Highness? Cautain said coyly. A concealed edge lingered beneath her voice. Mischief coiled and sprang within her, but Dorian answered, I suppose, he drawled, turning those brilliant blue eyes on Selena, that it will be difficult for Lady Lillian and I as well. Perhaps more so. Cautain snapped her attention to Selena. Wherever did you find that dress? She purred. It's extraordinary. I had it made for her, Dorian said casually, picking at his nails. The assassin and the prince glanced at each other, their blue eyes reflecting the same intent. At least they had one common enemy. It does look extraordinary on her, doesn't it? Cautain's lips pursed for a moment, but then bloomed into a full smile. Simply stunning, though such pale green tends to wash out women of pallid skin. The Lady Lillian's paleness was a source of pride for her father. It makes her rather unusual, Dorian said to Cal, who failed in his attempt to not appear incredulous. Don't you agree, Captain Westfold? Agree about what? He snapped. How unusual our Lady Lillian is? Shame on you, your Highness, Selena chided, concealing her wicked amusement beneath a giggle. I pale in comparison to Lady Cautain's fine features. Cautain shook her head, but looked at Dorian as she spoke. You are too kind. Dorian shifted on his feet. Well, I've dallied enough. I must attend to my mother. He bowed to Cautain, then to Cale. Finally, he faced Selena. She watched with raised brows as he lifted her hand to his lips. His mouth was soft and smooth upon her skin, and the kiss sent a red-hot line of fire up through her arm that singed her cheeks. She fought against the urge to step back, or smack him. Until our next meeting, Lady Lillian, he said with a charming smile. She would have highly enjoyed seeing Cautain's face, but she dipped into a curtsy. We must be off on our way as well, Cal said as Dorian strode off, whistling to himself. his hands in his pockets. May we escort you anywhere? It was an insincere offer. No, Caltaine said flatly, the facade falling. I'm meeting with His Grace Duke Carrington. I do hope we'll see more of each other, Lady Lillian, she said, watching her with a keenness that would make any assassin proud. We must be friends, you and I. Of course, Selena said. Caltaine swept past them, the skirts of her dress floating in the air around her. They resumed walking, waiting until her footsteps had vanished from their ears before speaking. Enjoyed that, did you? Cal growled. Immensely. Selena patted Cal's arm as she took it in her own. Now you must pretend that you like me, or else everything will be ruined. You and the Crown Prince share the same sense of humour, it seems. Perhaps he and I will become dear friends, and you'll be left to rot. Dorian is more inclined to associate with ladies of better breeding and beauty. She whipped her head to look at him. He smiled. How vain you are. She glared. I hate women like that. They're so desperate for the attention of men that they'd willingly betray and harm members of their own sex. And we claim that men cannot think with their brains. At least men are direct about it. They say that her father is as rich as a king, Cale said. I suppose that's part of why Parrington is so infatuated. She arrived here in a litter bigger than most peasants' huts. It was carried here from her home, a distance of almost 200 miles. What debauchery! I pity her servants. I pity her father. They chuckled, and he lifted the arm linked with hers a bit higher. She nodded to the guards outside her chambers as they stopped. She faced Cale. Are you eating lunch? I'm starved. He glanced at the guards, his smile fading. I have important work to do, like prepare a company of men for the king to bring with him on his journey. She opened the door but looked at him. The tiny freckle upon his cheek moved upward as a smile spread once more. What? She asked. Something smelt delicious inside her chambers, and her stomach growled. Cale shook his head. Unland's assassin, he chuckled, and began walking down the hall. You should rest, he called over his shoulder. The competition actually begins tomorrow, and even if you're as fantastic as you claim to be, you're going to need every moment of sleep you can get. Though she rolled her eyes and slammed the door, Selena found herself humming throughout her meal.